All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Ignite. Welcome to this session on Yammer Identity and User Management. My name is Samir Sitaram. I'm a program manager on the Office 365 Customer Experience team. So my job is basically to ensure that our customers derive maximum value from Office 365 and its services. And Yammer is one of the products that I'm very, very inclined to. Joined here by the fantastic Martina Grom. I'll let her do a quick introduction.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Martina Grom. I'm an Office 365 MVP, and gladly I can present two sessions today together with Samir. And in the afternoon, we will talk about user identities within Yammer.
All right. So we've got a pretty packed agenda. We're going to do a lot of demos, and we're going to, do a little bit of death by PowerPoint. But we'll try to keep this very, very fast-paced. One big takeaway from this is that after this session, you will understand what identity is like today in Office 365 and Yammer and where we're heading to in the future. So let's do a quick show of hands over here. How many people have used Yammer before? Awesome. That's pretty much everybody, so we don't have to go through a 101. How many people have Yammer single sign-on enabled on their networks? Okay, that's a fair bit. And how many people are using Yammer basic authentication, where you simply pop in a Yammer username and a password to authenticate into Yammer? All right, and last question, and then no more questions, and then you can ask me questions, is how many people have Yammer Basic versus how many people have Yammer Enterprise? So let's start with Basic. Who has the freemium Yammer? Who is not upgraded to the Enterprise version? Okay, small show of hands. Very good. So the rest of you are on Yammer Enterprise. So again, quick takeaway, we're going to learn about identity today as it applies to Yammer. All right. So to support that, we're going to go through a quick Yammer overview. We're going to look at identity management as it applies to Yammer today. Look at Yammer directory synchronization. That's one of the tools we have available to write your on-premise Active Directory into Yammer. We're going to look at a bunch of demos on the way, talk about our identity vision, and so on and so forth. So before I start, I really wanted to set up a quick little context of Yammer's innovative approach. So Yammer began in 2008. David Sachs and Adam Pisoni started Yammer in Southern California. And this was when there wasn't really any concept of enterprise social. It was customer social networking tools. You had Facebook, Twitter, MySpace was around there, Orkut was around, and so forth. One of the things that we saw with these consumer social networking tools was that people were voluntarily onboarding onto this. There wasn't any coaxing. People weren't shepherded into it like you would see in an enterprise application. People voluntarily joined because they saw value in these services. Their friends, their family were sharing incredible stories on it, and they want to become a part of this social circle. So Adam Pisoni and David Sachs tried to bring the same idea with enterprise social to the enterprise. So the tenets with which Yammer was born was primarily the following. I don't know why this clicker doesn't work over here. I'm supposed to stand over here, but I like to move around. So in order for enterprise social to be successful, there are four major tenets. Number one, it needs to be adopted. Social is very, very different. You need to have people in the room, otherwise you're talking to yourself. It needs to be valuable. There needs to be more value than just simple cat pictures on there. Cat pictures are great. We all enjoy cats. But there needs to be actual provable business use cases that you can use with enterprise social. The third thing, or the third tenet, is that it needs to have a consumer-like interface. Very often in the enterprise, we go back 20 years. We look at consumer social networking tools or any consumer application out there, and then you come to the enterprise, you're a completely different person. You've got to go through multiple login screens and multiple scripts and so forth to get it enabled. So enterprise social needs to have a consumer-like interface for people to adopt it. And the final tenet over here is that it needs to be enterprise-grade. So we're not serving the consumer market, we're serving an enterprise market, so you need to have tools available for administrators to manage data, to manage users on that network. A lot of our customers come from highly regulated industries. They come from government where data needs to be in certain stores and needs to be managed, which is why we've got enterprise tools available in Yammer. So these four tenets led to the development and birth of Yammer. And then fast forward from 2008 to 2012, Yammer gets acquired by Microsoft. And now it's the single enterprise social layer across the Office 365 stack. One of the things that our customers, I try and stress with our customers, and I try to stress this internally as well, that with enterprise social, it's not all about the technology. you've got to apply that 80-20 rule. It's very, very easy to over-engineer something and focus all your attention on engineering. And what you've lost in that whole mix is the ability to attract users to your application. You need to work with your business teams to enable them to come up with valuable business use cases so that users can onboard onto this application easily and derive value from it, as opposed to over-engineering something. So start small, start simple, and this 80-20 rule is not just applicable to enterprise social, it's applicable to pretty much everything, but very, very particular to enterprise social when it's established in an organization. All right, a quick little overview of Yammer. All of you have seen this. I don't know how many of you have seen it in conjunction with Office 365, but this is the Yammer UI, very, very simple and very easy to use. I'm not going to beat around the bush with this, but just wanted to point out a few areas. You've got your groups on the left-hand side. You've got your newsfeed right in the middle. Online now is the instant messenger within Yammer. We're talking about integration with Skype for Business and so forth. And if you attended Gadi and Juliet's roadmap session just now, you probably heard more about how we're integrating with Skype in the future. On the bottom right-hand corner, it says Networks and Admin. I'm an administrator of this particular Yammer network, which is why I see the admin link over there. Otherwise, you wouldn't see it. And on the top, we have, on the top you have the Office 365 button there. So quick understanding over here. Why do you want to manage identities, period? We all have multiple identities. There are so many IDs floating around over there, right? You've got your work identity, you've got your school identity, you've got your corporate identity, and you've got your personal ID and so forth. The main reason why you would want to manage identities in a corporate application is for two things. Number one is user engagement. You want to make it very, very simple and easy for your users to onboard onto any application, which is why you would want to manage identity, which is why single sign-on comes into play. You don't want users to have multiple identities and confused with what they want to log in and stuff like that, right? So you want to make it simple for them to log in. The other reason is compliance. I want to make sure that within my corporate resources, only certain people can access it. It's not a free-for-all, so I want to ensure that that security blanket is put around the corporate application, which is why you would do it from a compliance perspective. So I'm going to quickly transition over to Martina over here. She's going to give us a background on networks and users within Yammer and talk about those containers and those relationships. And then after that, we're going to jump into a few demos and check things out. Thanks. You might want to stand over here. You can't stand there. It doesn't change.
I see.
I keep doing it.
So what are networks and what are users in the purpose of how it's done in Yammer? Each network or each Yammer network contains one domain, one or more domains within Office 365, and you can enable them. And it's a secure network. And on the other side, you can have groups within your Yammer networks. You can have a group, partner programs, and so on. And this is the secure network you are showing today, where I see, okay, with my contoso.com domain, I'm in that network, and I'm not sharing it externally. We use it within our company. On the other side, there could be another company, it's Northwind. And this has its own network as well within Yammer. And they have different groups as well within there. And then those two companies start to work together, and then you have two options within the networks. One of the options is that you create an external network within Yammer, and that means you have an external network with other groups and so on, and this external network is also separated from your home-based network. So the people from Northwind don't have access to the contoso.com parent network. On the other side, the last option you have, you can also do guest collaboration. That means you can just invite guests into your northwind.com network and invite them as guests within the network. The last point, which is new there, is you can also use external messaging. Probably for those guys who were in the last session, the roadmap session, they showed that. This means you will be able to invite external users to your internal conversations as well within the Yammer network. And this is the third part you can use there. On the other side, we have users, and how is the user workflow in Yammer? You have if a user signs up or get an invitation from another Yammer colleague, his status is within the network is pending. That's the first status the user has there. And after that, if the user signs up, he gets an active user. And then he can start liking messaging, posting messaging, and so on. And then the next step, a status a user can have is suspended. What does suspended mean? The user is no longer an active part in the network, so he gets suspended. All his messages stay in the network, but he's not working anymore. Another status you have here is a deleted user. What means it's a deleted user? It was completely deleted out of the network. He cannot sign in anymore. The difference between a suspended and deleted user is that the suspended user, as long as he has a corporate email address, can sign in again and make his account active again. Each suspended user will be deleted after 90 days. In that time frame, it will be deleted out of the network. That's the last error we have there. And how will users be updated? There are three options there. You can update users through a simple CSV file in the admin portal where you update the users and delete them, suspend them, activate them, or update them. The next point is you can use Yammer Directory Sync. Yammer Directory Sync is apart from what we have now with Office 365 Directory Sync. Yammer Directory Sync looks at your Active Directory and makes a directory sync out of the Yammer identity system. Samir will show that live after in his demos. And the third part is how you can update users is through the Yammer API, where you can fill in all information directly into the user profile service in there. So if we are talking identities, we have two options there. On the one part, you have Yammer Directory Sync, which means from the Active Directory, you get the synchronization out to the users, you provision them, you suspend them. On the other side, you can use Office 365 Simplified Login, which means any activated Office 365 user can sign in into Yammer with his Office 365 credentials. And the mixture between those both is the sweet spot in the middle, where you see you use Directory Sync frequently to update users, to update user profiles, and so on. And all users use their Office 365 sign-in credentials to have them activated there. So back to Samir.
Okay, thank you, Martina. So obviously we're going to talk about identity management. So the biggest takeaway is that we've announced Office 365 sign-in for Yammer, which means under certain conditions, and we'll talk about those conditions, under those conditions, you can simply federate to one single entity, which is Office 365. So this is another step for bringing Yammer under the umbrella of Office 365. There have been separate identities, separate directories for Yammer and Office 365, and this is our first step forward into essentially merging those two identities together. There'll still be separate directories for the services, but from your perspective, from an IT admin perspective or from a user perspective, you will treat this as one single entity, and we've made several inroads into that. So as I go through this presentation, I'm going to divide stuff into two different buckets. One is going to be a simple bucket, and the other one's going to be a not-so-simple bucket. I wanted to use complex, but our marketing folks said, no, don't use complex. Call it not-so-simple. So it's not very complex, so it's not very simple. I mean, it's not quite simple. Anyway, so we're going to divide it into two, and then we're going to talk about how to enable Yammer simplified login, and then we're going to talk about how to use federated login with Yammer. So step number one is let's talk about Office 365 simplified login or Office 365 sign-in for Yammer. If you were to do a Bing search or a Google search or whatever your favorite search engine is and simply search for Office 365 sign-in, you will see a blog out there that talks about how this works. Very simply, as Martina put it, if you have satisfied certain conditions, and I'll talk about those conditions, if you've satisfied certain conditions, then any user trying to log into Yammer will go to Office 365 and log in from there. So essentially what we've done is we've mapped users between Office 365 and Yammer. So say, for instance, John Doe logs in. There's a check that is performed on the Yammer end to say, hey, has John Doe logged in to Office 365 before? And if John Doe has logged into Office 365 before, we'll say, okay, use whatever you're doing for Office 365 to log this user in. If you're using federated IDs with Office 365, that's going through your ADFS, to your Ping Federate, to your Okta, whatever it may be. We'll send that user over there. You manage the authentication, and you send us a token, and we'll log that user into the overall umbrella, which is Office 365. So with that, I will take you through a quick little demo of two users, one who has Office 365, one who is logged into Office 365, and the other one who is not logged into Office 365. So let's start with this user over here. His name is Steve, and my domain is Hot Idli. For somebody who doesn't know what idli is, it's a South Indian delicacy. It's very tasty. I'm going to pop in my password over here and select sign in. All right, that's meant to happen. All right, so I'm in Office 365 now. I'm logged into Office 365. We have the suite navigation at the top, and everybody's used to this. People have logged into Office 365 before. But if you look at the top over here, you'll see Yammer enabled. And when I click on Yammer, again, this user is not logging into Yammer. All we're checking is, hey, Steve Jones is logged into Office 365 before. Hence, we're going to use Office 365 to sign this user into Yammer. In a couple short shakes, on the top left-hand side, you will see the banner appear for Office 365. So essentially, it's one contained experience via Office 365 that this user is logging into Yammer with. So now, the biggest advantage over here is one login. This user can dance between applications. Yammer was not integrated into Office 365 to this level before, and now it is. Because now, no matter where Steve goes, now let's try this again. If I were to go, I'm going to close this guy out, and let's get another incognito here. If I were to go to yammer.com over here, you'll notice what I'm talking about. Yammer.com, and I'm going to try and sign in as Steve again. So go to login, and Steve at hotidli.in. Now, when I tab out, there's a check that's being performed. You see that little circle over there? There's a check that's being performed on our end to say that, hey, Steve is a federated user. Take him to Office 365, and wherever you take him from there is where this user will go to authenticate. So that's one example, right? So you're using Office 365 to sign in. Now, let's assume some user who has not signed into Office 365. Maybe you're going through an Office 365 implementation right now, and you've got some users in the Yammer directory, some users in the Office 365 directory. You're just onboarding Exchange. There's a lot of work going on. You have not basically provisioned all your users into Office 365. What happens then? In that case, this user will continue to use his Yammer ID, right? So if I go to yammer.com over here, I've got another user who I'm going to test this with. Same domain. And this user is Roger. So if I go to roger at hotidli.in, there's a check that's being performed again. And the check says, hey, by the way, Roger Moore has not logged into Office 365 before. So let's go ahead and use our Yammer credentials to get this guy in. I'm going to type in this password and select login. And this user will be logged into Yammer directly. If you look at the top left over there, there is no navigation bar because this user has not gone in through Office 365. He's simply using his Yammer ID to log in over there. So it's different experiences for different sets of users. The moment Roger logs into Office 365, that's the road he will take to log into Yammer. All right? So 5. Okay. So let's switch screens over here. So that was our demonstration for Office 365 sign-in for Yammer. So like I said, there are certain conditions involved for who gets it. And let's talk about the benefits first, and then we'll get to the conditions, right? So the idea is one credential and seamless experience, right? One login for Yammer and Office 365. I can't stress that enough. You don't need multiple logins, just one login, because Yammer is a part of that umbrella now, okay? The other point is that you don't have to set up a separate relying party trust for Yammer. So in your ADFS, you don't have to set up another relying party trust because you're simply setting up one for Office 365. You're using WS Federation to federate with Office 365, and that's pretty much what you will use. The third point is that you can also bring your kiosk workers easily into the fold. So Office 365 has a license called Enterprise K1 license. It's a K1 license that allows you to bring users without email at a very, very small price point into the fold so that you can provide the power of enterprise social to your entire organization. And then finally, if you've got Office 365, which means you have subscription to basic Azure as well, with Azure AD, you can also set up multi-factor authentication. So when I was trying to log in earlier, we've got multi-factor set up on a Microsoft network. So I go through a phone portal. I know something, which is my password, and I have something, which is my phone, and a PIN. So I go through multiple gateways to get into my service. So who gets it, right? So step number one, get Yammer Enterprise activated. How do you do that? Do a Bing search. Enterprise activation for Yammer. It's 3 steps. It's super, super simple. You do that, and Yammer Enterprise is activated for your domain. Number 2, Yammer SSO is not enabled for your domain. So if you've got Yammer single sign-on enabled, if you're federating separately with Yammer today, you do not get Office 365 sign-in for Yammer. So if you want this sign-in for Yammer experience, if you want to get rid of that federation server that is supporting Yammer, then you simply go ahead and remove SSO and then do the enterprise activation. And the third condition is there is a one-to-one relationship between your Yammer network and your Office 365 tenant. So you've got, say for instance, you've got 50 different domains in Office 365, right? The idea is that you have a single tenant to a single network sort of relationship. So in order to do that on the Yammer front, what you will do is you will merge these domains together. So you'll say that, hey, Contoso.com is my main network, A.com, B.com, C.com, D.com, E.com, all these different networks are children of that Contoso.com network. So it's a simple support ticket, log into your Office 365 portal, fire up a ticket to Microsoft support saying that I want to merge these networks together because they are in a single tenant. And when you merge these networks together, you get Office 365 sign-in for Yammer. So these 3 conditions fulfilled will get you to our new sign-in experience. Again, the idea is that the user logs in with his Office 365 credentials. He can navigate between applications very, very easily. So there's no this awkwardness of like, oh, God, I've got to log in again into my IDP and get another token, da-da-da-da-da. No, it's just one credential, and you manage one single endpoint. So the next thing we want to do is demo federated authentication. So this is your experience today, right? So most of us, I saw a lot of hands raised over here about using federated authentication, where you're simply federating to your identity provider. And we're going to try that over here with a different network. So what I can do is I can go to login. Let me actually go to yammer.com/bytenow.in. This is my bytenow.in test network. And I go over there. Yammer notices that, hey, this is getting federated. Let's send this to a separate federation box. So if you look at the URL over there, it's going into my federation server, samsardc.bytenow.in, right? So now what I can do is I can log in as a user over here. And a lot of you do this today. So I select login, and I'm logged straight into Yammer. If you notice at the top, you still have the old Yammer masthead. There is no buttons to get into Office 365 and so forth. So you have that separate experience, right? So 2 different experiences. One is using the sign-in experience. The other one is using this federated sign-in experience. So now if I wanted to log into Office 365, I'm going to have to go ahead and go through here. And it should recognize my cookie because I'm already in. If I go simply tab over here, obviously I have a cookie established because I've already authenticated to Yammer via the identity provider. So I'm logged straight into my Office 365 portal. All right. 5, right?
5.
Yeah. So what does it mean to have this not quite simple federated authentication to Yammer? A couple of things, right? Number 1 is you need to create a separate relying party trust for Yammer. So in your ADFS box, you're simply going to say, hey, I want to federate to Yammer, and you will create that separate relying party trust. Number 2 is that you will not get the Office 365 banner at the top of the page, which is why we're trying to stress people to move towards that Office 365 sign-in experience as opposed to the federated experience. It's much better for your users, and from an admin perspective, it's a lot easier for you to manage as well. The third one is that you can use your identity provider with this federated authentication to authenticate users without emails. And I'm going to show you how to do that here shortly, right? So you have these kiosk workers, baristas, cooks, and so forth, who who don't have email addresses. They really don't have a need for email because they don't really receive any email, but you want them to be a part of your social fold. So you can do that with your own identity provider. You can basically authenticate these users by sending in a different assertion to Yammer. So generally, when you federate with Yammer, we expect you to send the email address of the user in the SAML assertion. What you're going to do with a user who does not have an email address is basically send a unique value. This unique value can be an employee ID, a PIN code, whatever that may be assigned to this user. You can simply attach that and send that over in the SAML. And I'll show you how to do that here shortly. It's very, very simple. The alternative, the simple route, is to go with the Office 365 K1 license. If you do the Office 365 K1 license, you don't have to monkey around with changing, inputting employee IDs and sending that in the SAML assertion and so forth. The SSO deployment process, and again, here's another reason to go with the Office 365 sign-in experience. It is not self-service. With Office 365, it's self-service. You can pretty much set it up, a couple PowerShell commands, and you've got SSO set up. With Yammer, it's about a 3-day process, right? So you've got to send your identity provider metadata to Yammer. Yammer will create a relying party trust on our end. We'll send you the service provider metadata file. There's some back and forth with Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 support. I've been on the receiving end of that sometimes as well. And then after that, you pretty much go through testing SSO, and then you activate SSO. Now, if you have the sign-in experience, you wouldn't have to deal with all this. But this is the deployment process for for the Yammer Identity Provider SSO. Couple things are also absent from this, right? You expect these things, but these things are not available. Attribute exchange, for instance, right? People are like, oh, we've set up federation with Yammer. Can we go ahead and send attributes about this particular user, and can you input these attributes into the user's profile? For instance, you want to send the user's phone number, his location, his job title, and so on and so forth. In the SAML, can you go ahead and pop this in that user's profile? The answer is no. We delegate that responsibility to an application called Yammer Directory Synchronization. This is expected, but unfortunately, it's absent from the SSO process. The other thing is WS federation, right? So a lot of Microsoft technologies use WS Fed. Yammer does not use WS-Fed. Yammer uses SAML. We use either SAML 1.1 or 2.0, preferred as 2.0, and that's the supported protocol. And any major identity provider, whether it's PingFeder or ADFS or Okta, supports SAML 2.0, so you should be able to use that. But I just wanted to call these things out because people expect these things to happen with Yammer SSO, but they aren't available today. And they will not be available in the future as well. The next thing I'd like to show you is how to work with users without emails. So for users without emails, there are, again, 2 experiences for this. One is the simplified experience, and the other one is the not quite simple, the federation experience. So let's go with the federation experience first, and then we'll come to the simplified experience over here, right? So now I've logged into my Azure box over here. It's a demo environment that I created in Azure, so a simulated on-premise environment. And what we're going to do is we're going to provide a user without an email address access to Yammer. So let's go ahead and create this user over here. Go to New, User. Let's call this user Frank. Give them password. Select Next, Finish. If you look at this user over here, I don't have an email address for this user. What I'm going to do instead is go and give this user an employee ID. So I found this VB script. You can simply run that VB script, and that'll allow you to input fields such as employee IDs and so on and so forth into Active Directory. So let's give this user an employee ID. For instance, I'm going to give him 553141. Select OK. One more thing over here to check out, right? So if I go to my ADFS, nothing comes up. So if I open up my ADFS over here, you'll notice that I've got a relying party trust created here for Yammer, and that uses WS Trust, SAML, and WS Federation. Now if I go to Edit Claim Rules, you'll notice that there are 2 claim rules that are issued over here. One is to send the SMTP address of the user as the SAML subject, and that's what we expect you to do. So like outgoing email address of the user is sent as a SAML subject. And the other one is to use an employee ID as the SAML subject. So instead of actually sending the SMTP of the user, I'm simply going to send the employee ID as the SAML subject for this particular user. So now we've got this user created. What I also want to do is go into my directory synchronization box over here, and then I'm going to go ahead and synchronize this user with Office 365. So I'm going to force an online directory sync over here. Now this user is synchronized with Office 365. And what I can do is, let's go ahead and log in as this Frank guy, right? So Frank will go to Yammer. We'll go to yammer.com/bikenow.in, and the same experience applies whether you're on the web or, if he's a user without email, he's probably working a lot from a shop floor or something. He probably has a mobile device. Same experience. He pops open the Yammer app, and then he can simply sign in from there. So let's sign in as Frank here. Frank at bikenow.in. I select sign in. And now this is the SAML onboarding process, right? So this user is getting onboarded via a SAML onboarding process. We didn't have to go through provisioning this users and stuff like that, right? This user is simply logged into Yammer, and the provisioning begins from over here. So I can pop in this user's name over here. Let's call it Lester. He's a cook, and he's a cook. Select next. And this is the simple onboarding process. He can invite other users onto his network and so forth, just like any other user would go through it. Let's have him join customer stories and a sales group. If I had a picture, I'd pop one for him. And this user is logged into Yammer now, right? So now if I go ahead, how do I know that this user doesn't have an email address? Because this user used a UPN to log into Yammer. He did not use an email address to log into Yammer. So he used a simple UPN. And if you go to his user profile, you will notice that there is no email address published for this user in the user profile. Department cook, no email address over here. One more thing we want to go ahead and quickly take a look while we're over here is, let me log in as the administrator onto this network. And when I log in as the administrator onto that network, I can perform a quick little data export. And when I do that data export, I will be able to notice that this user does not have an email address. So let me log in as myself again. You'd be surprised how many times I've logged in onto all these networks through constructing these demos. Right, so now I'm in my network. I go into my admin settings over here on the bottom right-hand corner, bottom left-hand corner. Go into user management. And then if I go to export users, I'm going to export users since, say, yesterday. So let's just do it from May 4th. My export's completed. Show this folder here. There should be a export for users. And right in the user export, you will notice, once this Excel opens, is one of the fields will have an API URL for this particular user. Excel's having a field day today. There it is. So the email address that's been supplied for this user is 553141@bikenow.in, which was what you sent as the SAML assertion. So our SAML subject was sent as 553141. So now I can go ahead and copy this user API URL just to perform another check here real quick to see what it's doing. If I go into this XML, you will notice that right over here, it says email address is 553141. And if I go further down over here, it says has a fake email address, and that's true. So what we've essentially done on the Yammer end is, like, the moment you send that employee ID, we just created a fictitious email address for that user on our backend. And we said, hey, don't send this user any notifications because it's a fictitious email address and so forth, right? So you can get your users without emails access to Yammer now. The other way of doing it is to do this simplified login, right? And that is very, very, very similar to what we went through with our first example with Steve, right? So the same user, right, has an enterprise Office 365 K1 license applied, and this user is able to log into Yammer just because that K1 license is applied to it as well. I'm not going to demo that because it's sort of redundant. You'll see me log into the same network. There's no difference in experience. The only difference is when you go into the admin portal for Office 365, you're giving this user a K1 license instead of an E3 license. Please. So we did this. All right. Moving on. Let's talk about Yammer directory synchronization. So what is Yammer directory synchronization? 3 core functions of Yammer directory synchronization, right? It's an application that you would pop on to your Windows server, and it'll talk to your Active Directory and make changes to Yammer based on the changes made to your Active Directory. Very, very similar to Office 365 DirSync. 3 main functions: add and invitations, profile updates, and suspensions. I have suspensions in dotted yellow over here because that's the most important thing it really does. The profile updates is the second most important thing, and adding a user onto Yammer is the third most important thing that it does. So the reason why I say suspension is probably the most important is because Yammer Active Directory Sync will suspend users from your Yammer network based on their status within Active Directory. If a user has been disabled in Active Directory or deleted within Active Directory, Yammer Directory Synchronization will go ahead and suspend that user from within the Yammer application. When a user is suspended within Yammer, they lose all access to everything from within Yammer, right? So whether they're logged into a mobile device, into a web part, or into a browser, whatever it may be, all those tokens are nullified, and then the user cannot log into Yammer again. So these are the core functions of Yammer directory synchronization. You can do profile updates with directory synchronization as well. So if you've got a litany of user information in Active Directory, like user's location, phone number, who their boss is, and stuff like that, you could use directory synchronization to proliferate those fields within Yammer as well. It also does addition of users. So you can have, say for instance, you have 50 users, right? And you run directory synchronization. These users will be created in something called a pending status within Yammer, which is what Martina spoke about earlier. So a pending status is basically somebody who's been created in Yammer but has not logged into Yammer yet. I see a couple of people yawning. I hope we can get you some Java as well. So what is absent from directory synchronization but is expected? Just like single sign-on, there are a couple of things that are not present, and people think they are. Well, unfortunately, there aren't. Number one is group synchronization. So you may have all these security groups in Yammer, and once you put directory synchronization into place, you're like, oh, I've got these security groups, I've got these distribution groups. These groups will get created as groups within Yammer. Unfortunately, that does not happen because there's no concept of group synchronization within directory synchronization. The other thing is user profile lockdown. So you've got all this profile information that you've pushed into Yammer, but unfortunately on the Yammer side, we give users the ability to change their profile because we want users to be involved. If somebody really wanted to change their profile and add something spiffy to it, we should allow them to do that. So that's the line of thought. So users can go ahead and change their profile information. There is no way to really lock down that profile information. There are a couple of things you can do with directory synchronization where you can go ahead and force all the profiles to be changed again, but we don't recommend you do that over and over because we want users to participate into this. So if somebody has actually changed their profile information, let it continue to remain that way. But again, once we go into the weeds with directory synchronization, you'll notice that there are certain things that can be done to overwrite what users have written in their user profiles. Quick little look at how directory synchronization has to be installed. It's a very, very simple application. It should take you about half an hour to do it. The only thing that really takes time is to provision a server, right? Once you have a server provision, there is no database required, so there's no SQL required. It comes with it packaged in it. It installs on a single server, so you can only have one installation of directory synchronization for your entire Yammer network. So if you've got 50 different Yammer networks and you've merged that into a single Yammer network, there's only one directory synchronization tool allowed for all those 50 different networks. But what you can do is you can add multiple Active Directory hosts to Yammer Directory Sync. So you can have 50 different Active Directory hosts floating out there. All of them will talk to one single Yammer Directory synchronization server, and you'll be able to provision and manage and suspend your users based on that. So it says Active Directory and LDAP expertise is required to configure custom filters. To be honest with you, I wouldn't really configure any sort of custom filters. The best thing you can do is star@yourcompanyname.com in your directory synchronization configuration. You want to query your whole directory as opposed to being very intricate and saying that, hey, I want to query this user with a particular attribute or this user section in a particular organization unit and so forth. The reason why you want to query the entire directory is because if you don't query the entire directory, then you're not managing those users, right? So if I say, oh, I just want to query this particular organization unit and limit my scope to that particular organization unit, then I'm only managing users within that organization unit. I'm not managing users in the other units that may be out there. So it's the best practice and the most simplest way of doing it is to query your whole directory, look for all the mail-enabled objects so that all those mail-enabled objects are managed within Yammer. And then finally, it syncs. So the initial sync may take longer depending on the size of your directory, right? So there are API rate limits for Yammer as well, and you can go to developer.yammer.com, check out the rate limits. So there's certain rate limits that apply. So your first initial big sync will take a while, but then after that, it's incremental syncs, right? So we look for a USN changed object within your directory, and then based on the changes, only those changes are published. So if you've had 50 suspensions or 20 suspensions of users or disabled 50 users in your Active Directory, then we're only going to basically write those 50 users to Yammer. It's not going to query your entire directory to do so. There's a way to do that. There's a file that you can delete within your directory sync, and we'll jump into that here in a moment, that will allow you to requery your entire directory. Bunch of code over here. So a good start, like I said, star@contoso.com. Keep it very, very simple. If you've got multiple domains and it's a merged network, then you can add these multiple mail-enabled domains over here as well. You don't want to have redundant queries over here. Again, why stress the system out if it's not necessary? Because if an object category is a person and the object class is a user, it's the same thing. You're repeating yourself, right? You want to ensure that your Active Directory objects are replicated in your global catalog as well. So make sure that it's replicated in global catalog. The final point over there it mentions is that it's difficult to exclude users. You don't really want to exclude users. Really, the good way to start with directory synchronization is to query the entire directory. You can also query multiple organization units within directory synchronization as well. So here we have some queries that are listed for these multiple organization units. For instance, the first one's querying an OU in France, the other one in Germany, and so forth. You can do that, but again, a simpler way of doing it is to query the entire directory, but you can break it down. Just produce yourself a new GUID. There are GUID generators out there. You would just produce a new GUID over there, and then you would add each one of these directories separately. So a couple best practices for directory sync, and we'll jump into the actual directory sync box over here in a minute. I think the most important thing over here is become friends with the AD administrators, right? They have the keys to the castle, so you really need to work with them in terms of getting this application up and running. You want to understand the user validation report. So when you run directory synchronization for the first time, there's a report that gets produced within Yammer, and this report shows you how many users are enabled in Yammer but are not available in your Active Directory. So this could be like former employees and people who have left the company and stuff like that. They may still have access to Yammer, but they are not present in your Active Directory. And since for most organizations, your Active Directory is your major source of the truth, you might want to look at this user validation report and say that, hey, I got to get rid of all these people from within Yammer because they're not present in my Active Directory. And this typically happens when a company is upgrading from Yammer Basic to Yammer Enterprise. Because Yammer Basic, anybody can join, right? Anybody with your organization's email domain can join that basic Yammer network. Once you upgrade to Enterprise and once you want to take control of the data and the users on the network, you will pull up this report and then basically remove users who aren't supposed to be a part of your Active Directory or part of your Yammer network. You can prepare a disaster recovery instance of Yammer directory synchronization as well. We have some customers with extremely large Yammer networks who do that, but in most cases it may not be necessary, because okay, somebody didn't get suspended for half an hour or 2 hours. It's not the end of the world. There are other ways to suspend users within Yammer as well. So you may not really need a DR instance of Yammer directory synchronization running. The other thing you can do with directory synchronization is, actually, I'm going to jump straight into our demo environment over here and show you the various pieces. So I have my synchronization actually running right now. So if I go into the properties over here, so I go About, Advanced Configuration. So we have 4 files over here, right? So this first file over here is my global settings.config, and this contains all of the information, the kit and the caboodle about my directory sync. It has my user ID. It has my token, which has been generated for this particular instance. And this is based on the fact that I've logged in as a verified administrator, who is the highest query administrator in Yammer into Active Directory sync. I've got one query over here. And I'm simply saying the filter is mail equals star, which is querying the entire Active Directory tree. And then I've got one query over here for deleted objects as well. So most organizations will go ahead and disable users in Active Directory before they delete them. So this will basically capture all the deleted objects within Active Directory as well. So all those tombstones who need to be deprovisioned from Yammer will be captured using that second query. Coming down further, I can choose an attribute map over here. So these are fields that will be written to Yammer. And I can choose to say, hey, what does this attribute map look like within my Active Directory? So if it's a separate attribute map, you can go ahead and change these fields over here. Come down further, and then I'm sending notifications as well. So I can choose to send notifications to an email address when directory synchronization has successfully performed its functions or when something has gone out of whack. So if my directory synchronization fails, or maybe a server has gone down or something, or Yammer has not been able to reach your directory synchronization server, an email can be sent out to an administrator saying that, hey, your directory synchronization failed. You might want to look into it. The other files we have over here is one called the incremental queries. So this is where the subsequent syncs take place, right? So you don't have the whole user sync happening at once. You have subsequent syncs happening, and that's based on the USN change property within this incremental query cursors file. There's also a last validation report over here that gets pulled up. So this basically shows you how many users were added, how many users were removed, how many users were suspended, and so forth. So this is basically the last time that the sync ran, what the output of that was. There's a service log in here as well. So if you want to look at any sort of successes or failures with directory sync and you're trying to sleuth something, you can look at this entire service log. There's also a UI log available over here that goes through the failures and successes that directory synchronization has gone through. All right, switch back. OK, so let's talk about, I just have a couple more slides left, and then we'll open it up for questions, and if you want to leave early, you can leave early as well, so whatever you want. We'll talk about a couple things today. So we'll talk about identity as it applies today and what we're expecting in the future. So today, as you guys have seen, you're able to access Yammer with your Office 365 credentials. So again, I urge you to go ahead and establish that Office 365 sign-in for Yammer experience. And once you do that, any user with an Office 365 ID, any user who successfully logged into Office 365 before, can log in with those credentials into Yammer. And again, you're establishing one federation there with your IDP for the entire Office 365 suite, which includes Yammer. The second thing we've done today is the ability to discover Yammer directly from within Office 365. So when a user logged in, they're able to click on the waffle, the suite navigation on the top left, and then they're able to onboard themselves onto Yammer directly from within Office 365. And the third thing is when you perform this enterprise activation, which I spoke about earlier, you get to synchronize your administrators from Office 365 into Yammer. So any administrators, any global administrators in Office 365 automatically become Yammer verified administrator. And the Yammer verified administrator is the highest choir of privileges within Yammer. So that gives you the ability of establishing directory synchronization, doing some advanced API work if you want to, because you need a verified admin token to do so. You can do data exports. So if you are running any sort of DLP or e-discovery systems or anything like that, and you need to export all the data from Yammer, you can do that with this verified admin credentials. So you want to ensure that once you perform that sync and you have global administrators in your Office 365, that they automatically become verified administrators within Yammer. Where are we heading towards in the future? So this is our vision, right? So as you can see, today, with this Office 365 sign-in for Yammer experience, what we're banking on is Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory is the backbone for authentication into Office 365, and Yammer is starting to leverage that as well. So you will start seeing deeper integration with Azure Active Directory when it pertains to Yammer. Azure Active Directory manages authentication for Office 365, and they're really good at it, so Yammer is going to rely on that one single framework to provide authentication into its service. And there are other goodness you get with Azure Active Directory as well. Perhaps like over time, you will see synchronization of groups within Azure Active Directory and Yammer. So say, for instance, you've created an on-premise group, a security group or a distribution group within the Active Directory. That gets synchronized into Azure Active Directory, and then it gets synchronized into Yammer. So Yammer will essentially rely on the goodness that Azure Active Directory provides out of the box to enable future integrations. The other thing you'll start seeing is Yammer simply using Office 365 login. So there's only going to be one way to get into Yammer in the future. There's not going to be this whole complex of, oh, do you have a Yammer ID? Do you have an Office 365 ID? Do you have federated, da-da-da-da-da? None of those flavors really apply. There's going to be one flavor, which is going to be Office 365. So anytime a user wants to get into Yammer, they will use their Office 365 credentials to do so. That may be a cloud ID or federated ID, depending on how you have set up your Office 365. But essentially, there's one road to get into the service. And then finally, there's going to be like one synchronization tool. So we spoke about directory sync. Today there are a couple tools, right? You're going to use one for Office 365, another for Yammer. That's because there are separate directories for both the products. There isn't one single directory for both the products. Eventually, you're going to start seeing one tool for both. So essentially, you're going to manage your users in Azure Active Directory, and the signals will be sent to Yammer to provision or deprovision that user. That user gets removed from Office 365, which means that user is getting removed from Azure Active Directory, and that means that the user will get removed from Yammer as well. So we're heading towards that direction in terms of using Azure Active Directory Connect, the new tool, to perform basically a Swiss Army knife type of function for both Yammer and Office 365. So next steps, right? And this is my final slide, and then we'll open it up for questions. So 3 or 4 different things that we hope you will do after this is, number one, perform the Yammer Enterprise activation. And the Yammer Enterprise activation is tying your Yammer domain or your Yammer network to your Office 365 tenant. It's very, very simple to do. It takes between 1 and 30 minutes to get it done. But really, the action is a minute long, and the rest of it is on our end. So you would go into Yammer, go to included services as an administrator. Go to Office 365, go to your included services, and then simply push a button to marry your Yammer Enterprise network with your Office 365 tenant. And if you don't have Yammer Enterprise, and if you're in Yammer Basic, your subscription will be automatically upped to Enterprise. And with the synchronization, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that will happen is all your Office 365 administrators now become Yammer verified administrators as well. Number 2 is to go through and merge your networks. So again, if you want that sign-in experience, Office 365 sign-in for Yammer experience, you've got to merge your Yammer network, because there's got to be a one-to-one relationship between your Office 365 tenant and your Yammer network. So go ahead and merge your networks. And that's done through a simple support ticket. You as a verified administrator or you as a global administrator within Office 365 can initiate a support ticket and merge your networks.
So when you merge two networks, does one of those networks lose its data?
So the question is, when you merge 2 networks, does one of that network lose its data? That's correct. The network that is being merged in to a parent network will lose its data. What we advise customers to do is, if that data is important to you, if that data is of high value, go ahead and perform a data export. There's a data export API available with Yammer. There's an admin function. You can simply go to the admin console and export all the content that's been posted into that network. We've worked with some partners as well that will enable the ability of importing that content into the new merged Yammer network. So there are options to do that. But really, yes, that content is gone. When a network is merged into another network, the network that is merging will lose its content. So go ahead and merge your networks, and then do a simple installation of Yammer directory synchronization and reconcile your users. So when I say simple installation of Yammer desync, just pop it on a server. It can run on your Office 365 DirSync server as well. Obviously, watch out for resource utilization and so forth. But you can just perform a simple LDAP query, mail equals star, and run your Yammer directory synchronization. The first time you run it, it's going to pull up a report. It's going to pull up this validation report. And with this validation report, you can go ahead and I'm just going to pull up that report here right now. With that validation report, like I said, you can go ahead and use a tool called bulk update to go ahead and delete those users from Yammer who are not present in the Active Directory. So there is a unmatched user report. That's what it's called within Yammer that gets pulled up. Just give it a second over here. So I go into directory synchronization over here, and it's going to say that it was last run at 8:07 p.m., and then I can simply export this unmatched user report over here. And the moment I export this unmatched user report, you will notice that these users are present in Yammer, but are not present in my Active Directory. So I can go ahead and delete these users using a tool called bulk update. So if you simply go to bulk update users over here, you'll notice that you can create a quick little CSV, and all you've got to say is delete or suspend these users because they're no longer present in your Active Directory, and those users will be removed. So this is probably one of the most important things you'll do once you've enabled Yammer Enterprise, is to basically see who is available and who's not available. There's a question here.
Why did Frank Lester appear in that report? Because I thought you synchronized him.
That's a good question.
Maybe it was something else.
Yeah, he's right here. So the reason why Frank Lester appeared over here is because Yammer directory synchronization will only manage users with an email address. Okay? So for users without email addresses, you cannot use Yammer directory synchronization, which is why we're trying to push people to use the Office 365 sign-in experience, because then you will have an email address for every user. So for users without email addresses, that's a very good point. Thanks for bringing it up. For users without email addresses, if you wanted to delete those users or suspend those users, you cannot use Yammer directory synchronization because it looks for mail-enabled objects. Right? So because this user does not have an email address, you'll use a tool called bulk update to go ahead and suspend or delete those users. There's another question here.
Will these just be a single force or multiple forces?
It'll do multiple for us. Yep.
So the question was?
Oh, the question was whether or not directory synchronization can query multiple forests, and the answer is yes.
Can you install the DirSync for Yammer on the same machine as the AD DirSync for Office 365?
So the question is, can you install Yammer on the same machine as the DirSync for Office 365? Yes, you can, but again, you want to look at resource utilization. In my demo environment, because there are not a whole lot of users, my machine's not getting taxed, I can get away with installing both in the same machine. So you probably could as well, but ensure that your server is not maxing out, the CPU is not maxing out. But yes, you can. There is no conflict between the two. Both of them will have different synchronization schedules. Yammer Directory Sync by default will run every 60 minutes. You can change that to your requirements. Yes, sir?
Can you comment on the timing of using the Azure Active Directory for Yammer?
Yeah, so today, yeah, you can use Azure Active Directory. The future integration, you should start seeing more stuff coming about in the next few months. There was a session that was conducted just before this one by Gotti and Juliet. There are PMs, and they've got more information on timing when it comes to these things in the roadmap. I urge you to watch that session, but there are certainly a lot of, That's probably one of our biggest focuses, is to ensure that Yammer is fully under the umbrella of Office 365. So you will start seeing motions towards Azure AD Connect, like the deprecation of the Yammer directory synchronization tool. Probably you'll probably hear more information about that in the next several months. But unfortunately, I don't have a date that I can communicate with you, but certainly happy to follow up and let you know. Yes, sir?
This may not fall in the scope of this session, but data retention, you mentioned 90 days. And I looked it up real quick. You sort of have to export that data out of Yammer. Is there anybody in this room that's doing anything with data retention from data users and so forth?
So the question is data retention with Yammer, right? So like after 90 days, data gets deleted, user gets deleted. What happens is somebody doing something about it. Generally, what our customers end up doing is they will do periodical exports of Yammer data, and they will pipe it into a third-party system, whether it's like Semantic DLP or Proofpoint or whatever it may be. They'll do incremental exports of that Yammer data. So from an e-discovery and compliance perspective, that data is always available to you. I can't comment on how many customers are actually doing this versus, but the tools are certainly available for you to do it. Yes, ma'am.
As further integration goes on with Azure Active Directory, will profiles start syncing with Office 365? Things like the photos, the description, things like that?
Yeah, so the question is, as further integration goes on with Azure Active Directory, will other aspects of user profiles start synchronizing with Yammer, or will you have to perform the synchronization separately? The answer is yes. That is the goodness that we get with Azure Active Directory, right? So you will be writing your on-prem Active Directory to one single store, which is Azure Active Directory, and Yammer will simply source that information from Azure Active Directory to enrich user profiles and so forth. So the answer is yes. It's not something that'll happen right away, but over time you will see that happening, which is why today, what we stress on our customers doing is to go ahead with the simplified login experience, do the enterprise activation and stuff like that, and make sure that Azure Active Directory, you're leveraging Azure Active Directory to authenticate your users into Yammer, and then use Yammer directory synchronization for profile updates and for suspending users from within Yammer. But in the future, yes, once we get rid of directory synchronization, the focus is going to be entirely on sourcing that information from Azure Active Directory and proliferating that user's Yammer profile. Hi, sir.
So for those of us who've been doing federated accounts for quite some time, is it recommended to back out that federation now and convert over to Office 365, or just leave it as is and let the thing settle out over the next couple of months until the next generation of authentication in Yammer is complete, and then just move to that?
Okay. So the question is, for those who have SSO set up today and are onboarding on Office 365, do we leave things as is, or do we nix that federation and move on to the Office 365 sign-in experience? The direction from Yammer, from Microsoft and the product group is move to the simplified login experience. So if you've got Yammer federation today set up separately and you don't have any sort of weird issues going on, you could go ahead and basically call Yammer support, pop in a ticket, get rid of your federation, separate federation to Yammer. Obviously there's a little bit of change management involved. Talk to your users about how they'll log into Yammer in the future and stuff like that, because they'll be using their Office 365 credentials. But yes, the answer is yes. Perform the enterprise activation, get rid of Yammer SSO, use the Office 365 simplified login experience to get your users into Yammer. And there's going to be a ton of communication, a ton of documentation available over there. But yeah, feel free to reach out to Yammer support, and it should be a very, very simple process for them to basically snap the connection between your SSO and Yammer, and then once you activate, you'll get the new experience. So, yeah. So once you break that bridge, then you'll have this new experience. Yes, sir.
Is there a mobile story with Yammer, Android, iOS, tablets? That's so far what I've seen, it's more of
Web presence. Oh, mobile is where I consume most of my information for Yammer as well. So yes, we've got a story for the iPad, for iOS, all iOS devices, Android devices, Windows phones. There's a first-class Yammer-generated, Yammer-created app available for all those different devices. Yep, so they're all available in the public app store. You can go to the Apple App Store, download the app from there. There's a fully dedicated mobile team that's working on improving the mobile experience. That's my primary way of consuming Yammer as well. So yes, absolutely.
And say, you could use federated identity.
Absolutely. We'll simply pop up a little browser, and we'll redirect that guy to your identity provider, and then the show starts from there. Yes, sir.
Maybe this is implied by the answer to that question, but I have some customers that have on-premise SharePoint and Office 365.
Okay.
Can they use federated identity?
Yes, they can. Yeah, so the question is, I've an on-premise SharePoint, they don't have Office 365, can we use federated identity? That would be the route to take, yes. Federate to Yammer. So that's one scenario where federated identities would come into play for Yammer specifically. But if you're onboarding on Office 365, go with simplified login. It'll make life a lot easier. Yes, sir?
We're using the Office 365 simplified login today. But one of the things that we've been requested to do from our users is kind of create like a vanity URL, almost like an IDP initiated log. But it seems like when you use the simplified login using OAuth, there's no way to create a smart link that would take it straight to Yammer, where they don't have to either hit the auth, hit the Yammer 365, or go to the Yammer.com site, put in their email address, and let it be read or
Okay. I'll take that suggestion back. Unfortunately, that's the only way to get to Yammer. Like you can do an IDP-initiated authentication as well, and a service provider-initiated authentication with Yammer as well. I'm sorry, I don't fully understand your question. Probably take it on a sidebar if that's okay.
I think there's some URL hints
Okay.
URL hints.
All right, so
Yeah, I mean, I think, are you saying if I go to Yammer.com/5 domain name, that it takes me to my SSO if I have it available?
No, like with the way it is right now with the simplified login, if I put in, ours is ahss.org, so if you go to yammer.com/ahss.org, it'll take you to the initial Yammer page where we'll have to put in our email address,
right.
which will then redirect us to, redirect users to our SSO, like IDP sign-in site, where then they'll enter their credentials using UPN instead of email address at that point. But you get them logged in there, and then the no-log goes back to Yammer to sign in.
So that's because there are two separate experiences there. You have users who have logged into Office 365 before, and users who haven't logged into Office 365 before. So essentially, okay, so you want any request sent to FHS or your organization to redirect to.
Well, we want to be able to provide a link, whatever it is, so that when they go there, it drops them straight into Yammer. Like we provide some links on our intranet site and other places where, so they don't land on, with Office 365, you can click on start page,
Yep.
on mail or whatever.
Yep.
We have links that'll take them straight into their SharePoint or straight into their OneDrive or straight into email. We want to provide the same functionality to get them straight into Yammer, but I don't have any way today to create that functionality.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, it's something we could talk about certainly. Any other questions here? I just have one more thing to say, and then I'll let you go. And that's all. Keep calm, Yammer on, and thank you very much for attending.